Hello everybody, welcome to another chapter, maybe two chapters of Silas Marner. Welcome, hope you've been watching so far, either live or on replay. Let's have a little sip first. So last time that we were reading, we met the two young men, what they call Dunstan and Godfrey, and Silas's money has been stolen by Dunstan, if you recall. So chapter 5, we might do chapter 6 as well because it's quite short. Hello, Nora. Welcome. I've got an older pair of Vans on today, Nora. You'll be interested in learning. Right, chapter 5. When Dunstan Cass turned his back on the cottage, Silas Marner was not more than 100 yards away from it, plodding along from the village with a sack thrown round his shoulders as an overcoat, and with a horn lantern in his hand. His legs were weary, but his mind was at ease, free from the presentiment of change. The sense of security more frequently springs from habit than from conviction, and for this reason it often subsists after such a change in the conditions as might have been expected to suggest alarm. The lapse of time during which a given event has not happened is, in this logic of habit, constantly alleged as a reason why the event should never happen, even when the lapse of time is precisely the added condition which makes the event imminent. That's kind of like the gambler's fallacy, that, isn't it? If something happens, then it will keep happening, or if something doesn't happen, it will keep not happening. A man will tell you that he has worked in a mine for 40 years unhurt by accident, as a reason why he should apprehend no danger, though the roof is beginning to sink, and it is often observable that the older a man gets, the more difficult it is to him to retain a believing conception of his own death. This influence of habit was necessarily stronger in a man whose life was so monotonous as Marner's, who saw no new people and heard of no new events to keep him alive in the idea of the unexpected and the changeful. And it explains, simply enough, why his mind could be at ease, though he has left his house and his treasure more defenceless than usual. Silas was thinking with double complacency of his supper. First, because it would be hot and savoury, and secondly, because it would cost him nothing. For the little bit of pork was a present from that excellent housewife, Miss Priscilla Lammeter, to whom he had this day carried home a handsome piece of linen, and it was only on occasion of a present like this that Silas indulged himself with roast meat. Supper was his favourite meal, because it came at this time of revelry, when his heart warmed over his gold. Whenever he had roast meat, he always chose to have it for supper. But this evening, he had no sooner ingeniously knotted his string fast round his bit of pork, twisting the string according to the rule over his door key, passed it through his handle and made it fast on the hanger, than he remembered that a piece of very fine twine was indispensable to his setting up a new piece of work in his loom early in the morning. It had slipped his memory, because in coming from Mr. Lammeter's, he had not had to pass through the village, but to lose time by going on errands in the morning was out of the question. Hello, Doll. Hello, Tiffany. Welcome. It was a nasty fog to turn out into, but there were things Silas loved better than his own comfort. So drawing his pork to the extremity of the hanger and arming himself with his lantern and his old sack, he set out on what in ordinary weather would have been a 20-minute errand. He could not have locked his door without undoing his well-knotted string and retarding his supper, but it was not worth his while to make that sacrifice. What thief would find his way to stone pits on such a night as this? And why should he come on this particular night, when he had never come through all the 12 years before? These questions were not distinctly present in Silas's mind. They merely served to represent the vaguely felt foundation of his freedom from anxiety. He reached his door in much satisfaction that his errand was done. He opened it, and to his short-sighted eyes everything remained as he had left it, except that the fire sent out a welcome increase of heat. He trod about the floor while putting his lantern and throwing aside his hat and sack, so as to merge the marks of Dunstan's feet on the sand in the marks of his own nailed boots. Then he moved his pork nearer the fire and sat down to the agreeable business of tending the meat and warming himself at the same time. Anyone who had looked at him as the red light shone upon his pale face, strange straining eyes, and meagre form would perhaps have understood the mixture of contemptuous pity, dread, and suspicion with which he was regarded by his neighbours in Raveloe. Yet few men could be more harmless than poor Marner. In his simple, truthful soul, not even the growing greed and worship of gold could beget any vice directly injurious to others. The light of his faith quite put out, and his affections made desolate, he had clung with all the force of his nature to his work and his money, and like all objects to which a man devotes himself, they had fashioned him into a correspondence with themselves. His loom, as he wrought in it without ceasing, had in its turn wrought on him, and confirmed more and more the monotonous craving for its monotonous response. His gold, as he hung over it and saw it grow, gathered his powers of loving together into a hard isolation like his own. As soon as he was warm, he began to think it would be a long wait until after supper before he drew out his guineas, and it would be pleasant to see them on the table before him as he ate his unwonted feast. For joy is the best of wine, and Silas's guineas were a golden wine of that sort. He rose and placed his candle unsuspectingly on the floor near his loom, swept away the sand without noticing any change, and removed the bricks. The sight of the empty hole made his heart leap violently, and the belief that his gold was gone could not come at once, only terror, and the eager effort to put an end to the terror. He passed a trembling hand all about the hole, trying to think it possible that his eyes had deceived him. Then he held the candle in the hole and examined it curiously, trembling more and more. At last he shook so violently that he let the candle fall. He lifted his hands to his head, trying to steady himself that he might think. Had he put his gold somewhere else by a sudden resolution last night, and then forgotten it? A man falling into dark water seeks a momentary footing even on sliding stones, and Silas, by acting as if he believed in false hopes, warded off the moment of despair. He searched in every corner. He turned his bed over and shook it and kneaded it. He looked in his brick oven where he laid his sticks. When there was no other place to be searched, he kneeled down again and felt once more all around the hole. There was no untried refuge left for a moment's shelter from the terrible truth. It's a sip of water. Can't believe you're not taking this seriously. The man's just desperate to feel in his hole. Yet there was a sort of refuge which comes with a protestation of thought under an overpowering passion. It was that expectation of impossibilities, that belief in contradictory images which is still distinct from madness because it is capable of being dissipated by the external fact. Silas got up from his knees, trembling, and looked round at the table. Didn't the gold lie there after all? The table was bare. Then he turned and looked behind him, looked all round his dwelling, seemed to strain his brown eyes after some possible appearance of the bags which he had already sought them in vain. He could see every object in his cottage, and his gold was not there. Again he put his trembling hands to his head and gave a wild, ringing scream, the cry of desolation. For a few moments after he stood motionless, but the cry had relieved him from his first maddening pressure of the truth. He turned and tottered towards his loom and got into the seat where he worked, instinctively seeking this as his strongest assurance of reality. And now that all false hopes had vanished and the first shock of certainty was past, the idea of a thief began to present itself, and he entertained it eagerly, because a thief might be caught and made to restore the gold. Sorry, this is Windows is interfering with this. There we go. Are we back on? Are we on? I think not. Okay. It began to present a made to restore the gold. The thought brought some new strength with it, and he started from his loom to the door. As he opened it, the rain beat in upon him, for it was falling more and more heavily. There were no footsteps to be tracked on such a night. Footsteps? When did the thief come? During Silas's absence in the daytime, the door had been locked, and there had been no marks of any inroad on his return by daylight. In the evening, too, he said to himself, everything was the same as when he had left it. The sand and bricks looked as if they had been moved. Was it a thief who had taken his bags? Or was it a cruel power that no hands could reach when he had delighted in making him a second time desolate? He shrank from this vaguer dread and fixed his mind with struggling effort on the robber with hands who could be reached by hands. His thoughts glanced at all the neighbours who had made any remarks or asked any questions which might now regard as grounds of suspicion. There was Jem Rodney, a known poacher and otherwise disreputable. He had often met Marner in his journeys across the fields, and he had said something jestingly about the weaver's money. Nay, he had once irritated Marner by lingering at the fire when he called to light his pipe instead of going about his business. Yeah. Jem Rodney was the man. There was ease in the thought. Jem could be found and made to restore the money. Marner did not want to push him, but only to get back his gold, which had gone from him, and left him a soul like a forlorn traveller on an unknown desert. The robber must be laid hold of. Marner's ideas of legal authority were confused, but he felt that he must go and proclaim his loss, and the great people in the village, the clergyman, the constable, and Squire Cass, would make Jem Rodney, or somebody else, deliver up the stolen money. He rushed out in the rain, under the stimulus of this hope, forgetting to cover his head, not caring to fasten his door, for he felt as if he had nothing left to lose. He ran swiftly till want of breath compelled him to slacken his pace as he was entering the village at the turning close to the Rainbow. The Rainbow, in Marner's view, was a place of luxurious resort for rich and stout husbands whose wives had superfluous stores of linen. It was the place where he was likely to find the powers and dignities of Ravello, and where he could now speedily make his loss public. He lifted the latch and turned into the bright bar or kitchen on the right hand, where the less lofty customers of the house were in the habit of assembling. The parlour on the left being reserved for the more select society, in which Squire Cass frequently enjoyed the double pleasure of conviviality and condescension. But the parlour was tonight dark, the chief parsonages, whose ornamented its circle being all at Mrs. Osgood's birthday dance, as Godfrey Cass was. And in consequence of this, the party on the high-screened seats in the kitchen was more numerous than usual. Several parsonages, who would otherwise have been admitted into the parlour and enlarged the opportunity of hectoring and condescension for their betters, being content this evening to vary their enjoyment by taking their spirits and water where they could themselves hector and condescend in company that called for beer. Next chapter. Shall we have the next one? It's quite interesting so far, isn't it? Let me get rid of this notification again. Windows is irritating me by bringing up more things. Can that go? Yes. Okay. Right. Chapter 6. Yes. Chapter 6. Everybody, remember International Women's Day today, and we're reading a book by Marianne Evans, despite the bad name. The conversation, which was at a high pitch of animation, I like that phrase, a high pitch of animation, in other words, hello to drunkards, when Silas approached the door of the Rainbow, had, as usual, been slow and intermittent when the company first assembled. The pipes began to be puffed in a silence which had an air of severity, the more important customers, who drank spirits and sat near the fire, staring at each other as if a bet were depending on the first man who winked, while the beer drinkers, chiefly men in fustian jackets and smock frocks, I used to say smock frocks. Nice to say though, fun to say smock frocks. I'm going to say it again, smock frocks, there you are. Kept their eyelids down and rubbed their hands across their mouths as if their draughts of beer were a funeral duty attended with embarrassing sadness. Frock smocks. At last, Mr. Snell, the landlord, a man of a neutral disposition, accustomed to stand aloof from human differences as those of beings who were all alike in need of liquor, broke silence by saying in a doubtful tone to his cousin the butcher, "Some folks would say that a fine beast you drove in yesterday, Bob." The butcher, a jolly, smiling, red-haired man, was not disposed to answer rashly. Is that a pun, you think? The butcher not answering rashly. He gave a few puffs before he spat and replied, "And they wouldn't be for wrong, John." After this feeble, delusive thaw, the silence set in as severely as before. "Was it a red Durham?" said the farrier, taking up the thread of discourse after the lapse of a few minutes. The farrier looked at the landlord, and the landlord looked at the butcher as the person who must take the responsibility of answering. "Red it was," said the butcher, in his good-humoured husky treble, "and a Durham it was." "Then you needn't tell me who brought it off," said the farrier, looking round with some triumph. "I know who it is has got the red Durhams o' this countryside. And she'd a white star on her brow, I'll bet a penny." The farrier leaned forward with his hands on his knees as he put this question, and his eyes twinkled knowingly. "Well, yes, she might," said the butcher slowly, considering that he was giving a decided affirmative. "I don't say contrary." "I knew that very well," said the farrier, throwing himself backwards again and speaking defiantly. "If I don't know Mr. Lammeter's cows, I should like to know who does, that's all. As to the cow you've brought, bargain or no bargain, I've been at the drenching of her. Contradict me who will." The farrier looked fierce, and the mild butcher's conversation spirit was roused a little. "Oh, I'm not for contradicting, no man," he said. "I'm for peace and quietness. Some are for cutting long ribs. I'm for cutting them short myself, but I don't quarrel with them. All I say is, it's a lovely carcass, and anybody else was reasonable, it'd bring tears into their eyes to look at it." "Oh, I bet. Well, it's the cow as I drenched, whatever it is," pursued the farrier angrily. "And it was Mr. Lammeter's cow, else you told a lie when you said it was a red Durham." "I'll tell no lies," said the butcher, with the same mild huskiness as before, "and I contradict none. Not if a man was to swear himself black, is no meat of mine, nor none o' my bargains. All I say is, it's a lovely carcass. That's what I say I'll stick to, but I'll quarrel with no man." "No," said the farrier with bitter sarcasm, looking at the company generally. "And perhaps you aren't pig-headed, and perhaps you didn't say a cow was a red Durham, and perhaps you didn't say she'd got a star on her brow. Stick to that now you're at it." "Oh, come," said the landlord. "Let the cow alone. The truth lies between you. You're both right and both wrong, as it lies say. And as for the cow being Mr. Lammeter's, I say nothing to you, but I say this, as the rainbow's the rainbow. And for that matter of that, if the talk is to be of the Lammeters, you know the most up of the head, eh, Mr. Macy? You remember when Mr. Lammeter's father came into these parts and took the warrens?" Mr. Macy, tailor and parish clerk, the latter of which functions rheumatism had of late obliged him to share with a small-featured young man who sat opposite him, held his white head on one side and twirled his thumbs with an air of complacency, slightly seasoned with criticism. He smiled pityingly in answer to the landlord's appeal and said, Aye, I know, but I'll let the other folks talk. I've laid by now and gave up to the young'uns. Ask them as have been to school at Tarley. They've learned pronouncing. That's come up since my day." "If you're pointing at me, Mr. Macy," said the deputy clerk with an air of anxious propriety, "I'm no wise a man to speak out my place, but as the psalm says, I know what's right, nor only so, but also practice what I know." "Well then, I wish you'd keep hold of the tune when it's set for you if you're practicing. I wish you'd practice that," said a large, jocose-looking man, an excellent wheelwright in his weekday capacity, but on Sundays leader of the choir. He winked as he spoke as two of the company, who were known officially as the bassoon and the key bugle, in the confidence that he was expressing the sense of the musical profession in Raveloe. Mr. Tookie, the deputy clerk, who shared the unpopularity common to deputies, turned very red, but replied with careful moderation, "Mr. Winthrop, If you'll bring me any proof as I'm in the wrong, I'm not to the man who won't say. I'm not the man to say I won't alter. But as people set up their own ears for a standard and accept the whole choir to follow them, they may be two opinions, I hope. Aye, said Mr. Macy, who felt very well satisfied with this attack on youthful presumption. You're right there, Tookie. There's always two opinions. There's the opinion a man has himself, and there's the opinion other folks have on him. There'd be two opinions about a cracked bell if the bell could hear itself. Well, Mr. Macy, said poor Tookie, serious amidst the general laughter, I undertook to partially fill up the office of parish clerk by Mr. Crackenthorpe's desire. Whenever your infirmities should make you unfitting, and it's one of the rights thereof to sing in the choir. Else, why have you done the same yourself? Ah, but the old gentleman, and you are two folks, said Ben Winthrop. The old gentleman's got a gift. Why, the squire used to invite him to take a glass only to hear him sing the Red Rovier, didn't he, Mr. Macy? It's a natural gift. There's my little lad Aaron, he's got a gift. He can sing a tune off straight like a throstle. It's a thrush. But as for you, Mr. Tookie, you'd better stick to your amens. Your voice is well enough when you keep it up your nose. It's your inside, as it isn't right made for music. It's no better nor a hollow stalk. Well, this kind of unflinching frankness was the most piquant form of joke in the company at the Rainbow, and Ben Winthrop's insult was felt by everybody to have capped Mr. Macy's epigram. I see what is plain enough, said Mr. Tookie, unable to keep it cool any longer. There's a conspiracy to turn me out of the choir as I shouldn't share the Christmas money. That's where it is, but I shall speak to Crackenthorpe, and I'll not be put upon by no man. That's my windows interfering here. Nay, Tookie, said Ben Winthrop. We'll pay you to keep your share. We'll pay you your share to keep out of it. That's what we'll do. There's folks that pay to be rid on besides varmin. Oh, come, said the landlord, who felt that paying people for their absence was a principle dangerous to society. A joke's a joke. We're all good friends here, I hope. We must give and take. You're both right, and you're both wrong, as I say. I agree with Mr. Macy here, as there are two opinions, and if mine was asked, I should say they're both right. Tookie's right, and Winthrop's right, and they've only got to split the difference and make themselves even. The farrier was puffing his pipe rather fiercely in some contempt at this trivial discussion. He had no ear for music himself and never went to church, as being of the medical profession, unlikely to be in requisition for delicate cows. But the butcher, having music in his soul, had listened with a divided desire for Tookie's defeat and for the preservation of the peace. To be sure, he said, following up the landlord's conciliatory view. We're fond of our old clerk, it's natural, and him used to be a singer, and got a brother as is known for the first fiddler in the countryside. It's a pity, but what Solomon lived in our village and could give us a tune when he liked, Mr. Macy? I'd keep him in liver and lights for nothing, that I would. Aye, said Mr. Macy, in the height of complacency. Our family's been known for musicianers as far back as anybody can tell. But then things are dying out. As I tell Solomon every time he comes round, there's no voices like what there used to be, and there's nobody remembers what we remember if it isn't the old crows, I should say. Aye, you remember when first Mr. Lamberter's father came into these parts, don't you, Mr. Macy? Said the landlord. I should think I did, said the old man, who had now gone through the complimentary process necessary to bring him up to the point of narration. And a fine old gentleman he was, as fine and finer nor the Lamberters as now is. He came from a bit northern, as far as I could ever make out. But there's nobody rightly knows about these parts, only it can be far northern, nor much different from this country, for he brought a fine breed of sheep with him. So there must be pastures there and everything reasonable. We herders tell he sold his own land to come and take the warrens, and that seemed odd for a man, as he had his own land to come and rent a farm in a strange place. But they said it was along of his wife's dying, though there's reasons and things as nobody knows on. That's pretty much what I've made out. Though some folks are so wise they'll find you 50 reasons straight off, and all the while the real reasons winking at him in the corner, and they never see it. Howsomever, it was soon seen as we'd got a new parishioner, as knowed the rights and customs of things, and kept a good house, and was well looked on by everybody. And the young man, that's the Lamater as now is, for he'd never a sister, soon begun to court Miss Osgood. That's the sister of the Mr. Osgood as now is, and a fine handsome lass she was. You can't think. They pretend this young lass is like her, but that's the way we young people has don't know what come before 'em. I should know, for I helped the old rector, Mr. Drumlow, as was, I helped him marry him. Here Mr. Macy paused. He always gave his narrative instalments, expecting to be questioned according to precedent. Aye, and a peculiar thing happened, didn't it, Mr. Macy? So you're likely to remember that marriage, said the landlord in a congratulatory tone. Oh, I should think there did. A very particular thing, said Mr. Macy, nodding sideways. Nodding sideways. Very particular thing. For Mr. Drumlow, poor old gentleman, I was fond of him, though he got a bit confused in his head, what way age and what way taking a drop of somewhat warm when the service came with a cold morning. And young Mr. Lamater, he'd have no way but he must be married in January, which to be sure is an unreasonable time to be married in, for it isn't like a christening or a burying, as you can't help. So Mr. Drumlow, poor old gentleman, I was fond of him, but when he came to the questions, he put them by rule of contrary like, and he says, Wilt thou have this man to thy wedded wife? Says he. And then he says, Wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded husband? Says he. But the particularest thing of all is, as nobody took any notice on it but me, and they answered straight off, yes, as if they had been saying amen in the right place without listening to what went before. But you know what was going on well enough, didn't you, Mr. Macy? You were alive enough, said the butcher. Oh, Lord bless you, said Mr. Macy, pausing and smiling in pity at the impotence of his hearer's imagination. Why, I was all of a tremble. It was as if I'd been a coat pulled by the two tails. For I couldn't stop the parson. I couldn't take upon me to do that. And yet I said to myself, I says, suppose they should be fast married, because the words are contrary. And my head went working like a mill, for I was always uncommon for turning things over and seeing 'em round 'em. And I says to myself, it's the meaning or the words as makes folk fast wedlock. The parson meant right, and the bride and bridegroom meant right. But then, when I come to think on it, meaning goes a little way in most things. And you may mean to stick things together, and your glue may be bad. And then, where are you? When we got into the vestry, and they began to sing at once. Oh, sorry, I missed a bit. Hang on. And I was worried as if I'd got 3 bells to pull at once. But when we got into the vestry, and they began to sing their names. But what's the use of talking? You can't think what goes in a cute man's inside. But you held it in for all that, didn't you, Mr. Macy? Said the landlord. Aye, I held on tight till I was by myself with Mr. Drumlow. And then I outweigh everything. But respectful, as I always did. And he made light on it. He said, Pooh, pooh, Macy, make yourself easy, he says. It's neither the meaning nor the words. It's the register does it. That's the glue. So you see, he settled it easy. For parsons and doctors know everything by heart, so they aren't worried when thinking what's the rights and wrongs of things, as I'd been many and many's the time. And sure enough, the wedding turned out all right. Only poor Mrs. Lambert, that's Miss Osgood as was, died before the lasses were growed up. But for prosperity and everything respectable, there's no family more looked on. Everyone of Mr. Macy's audience had heard this story many times, but it was listened to as if it had been a favourite tune, and at certain points the puffing on the pipes was momentarily suspended, that the listeners might give their whole minds to the expected words. But there was more to come, and Mr. Snell, the landlord, duly put the leading question. Why, old Lamater had a pretty fortune, didn't they say, when he came to these parts? Well, yes, said Mr. Macy, but I dare say it's as much as this Mr. Lamater's done to keep it whole. For there always is talk as nobody could get rich on the Warrens, though he holds it cheap, for it's what they call charity land. Aye, there's a few folks knows so well how it come to be charity land, eh, Mr. Macy? Said the butcher. How should they? Said the old clerk with some contempt. Why, my grandfather made the groom's livery for that Mr. Cliff as came and built the big stables at the Warrens. Why, there are stables 4 times as big as Squire Cass's, for he thought of nothing but horses and hunting. Clifton, a Lunnon tailor, some folks said as had gone mad with cheating, for he couldn't ride, Lord bless you. They said he got no more grip of the horse than if his legs had been cross sticks. My grandfather heard old Squire Cass say many and many a time. But ride he would as if old Harry had been driving him, and he'd a son, a lad of 16, and nothing would his father have him do, but he must ride and ride, though the lad was frightened, they say. And it was a common saying as the father wanted to ride the tailor out of the lad, and make a gentleman of him. Not what I call a tailor myself, but in respect as God made me such, I'm proud on it. For Mr. Macy's tailor had been wrought up over our doors since afore the Queen's heads went on the shillings. But Cliff, he was ashamed of being called a tailor, and he was sore vexed as his riding was laughed at, and nobody of the old dental folks hereabouts could abide him. Howsoever, the lad got sickly and died, and the father didn't live long after him, for he got queerer nor ever. And they say he used to go out of the dead of night with a lantern in his hands to the stables, and set a lot of lights burning, for he got as he couldn't sleep, and there he'd stand, cracking his whip and looking at his horses, and they said it was a mercy the stables didn't get burned down, with the poor dumb creatures in them. But at last he died raving, and they found as he'd left all his property, Warrens and all, to a Lunnon charity. And that's how the Warrens came to be charity land. Though as for the stables, Mr. Lammeter never used them. They're out of all character, Lord bless you. If you was to set the doors a-banging in them, it'd sound like thunder half o'er the parish. Aye, but there's more going on in the stables than what folks see by daylight, eh, Mr. Macy? Said the landlord. Aye, go that way a dark night, that's all, said Mr. Macy, winking mysteriously. And then make believe, if you like, as you don't see lights in the stables, nor hear the stamping of the horses, nor the cracking of the whips and howling too. If it's toward daybreak. Cliff's Holiday had been the name of it ever since I were a boy. That's to say, some said it was the holiday old Harry gave him from roasting, like. That's what my father told me, and he was a reasonable man, though there's folks nowadays know what happened before they were born better nor they know their own business. What do you say to that, eh, Dowlas? Said the landlord, turning to the farrier, who was swelling with impatience for his cue. That's a nut for you to crack. Mr. Dowlas was the negative spirit in the company and was proud of his position. I say what a man should say as doesn't shut his eyes to look at a finger post. I say I'm as ready to wager any man £10 if you'll stand out with me in any drying out in the pasture before the Warren stables, as we shall neither see lights nor hear noises, if it isn't the blowing of our own noses. That's what I say, as I've said many a time, but there's nobody'll venture a £10 note on the ghosses as they make so sure of. Why, Dowlas, that's easy betting, that is, said Ben Winthrop. You might as well bet a man he wouldn't catch the rheumatize if he stood up to a neck in his pool of the frosty night. If it had been fine fun for a man to win his bet as it'd catch with rheumatize, folks as believe in Cliff's holidays ain't going to venture near it for a matter of £10. If Mr. Dowlas wants to know the truth on it, said Mr. Macy with a sarcastic smile, tapping his thumbs together, he's no call to lay any bet. Let him go off and stand by himself. There's nobody to hinder him, and then he can let the parish know if anything there were wrong. Oh, thank you. I'm obliged to you, said the farrier with a snort of scorn. If folks are fools, it's no business of mine. I don't want to make out the truth before the ghosses. I know it already. But I'm not against a bet. Everything fair and open. Let any man bet me £10 as I shall see Cliff's holiday, and I'll go and stand by myself. I want no company. I'd have life to do it and fill this pipe. But who's to watch you, Dowlas, and see you do it? That's no fair bet, said the butcher. No fair bet, replied Mr. Dowlas angrily. I should like to hear any man stand up and say I want to bet unfair. Come now, Master Lundy, I should like to hear you say it. Oh, very like you would, said the butcher, but it's no business of mine. You're none of my bargains. I ain't going to try and bait your price. If anybody, I'll bid for you as your own value and let him, for I'm peace and quiet as I am. "Oh yes, that's what every yapping cur is, when you hold a stick up at him," said the farrier. "But I'm afraid of neither man nor ghost, and I'm ready to lay a fair bet I aren't a turn-tail cur." "Aye, but there's this in it, Silas," said the landlord, speaking in a tone of much candour and tallness. "There's folks, in my opinion, they can't see ghosts, nor if they stood as plain as a pikestaff before 'em, and there's reason i' that. For there's my wife now, can't smell. Now if she'd the strongest of cheese under her nose, I've never seen a ghost myself, but then I say to myself, very like I haven't got a smell for them. I mean, putting a ghost for a smell, or else contrariwise. And so I'm for holding with both sides, for, as I say, the truth lies between 'em. And Dowlas was to go and stand and say he'd never seen a wink of Cliff's holiday, if all the night through I'd back him, and if anybody said as Cliff's holiday was as certain sure for all that, I'd back him too, for the smell's what I go by." The landlord's analogical argument was not well received by the farrier, a man intensely opposed to compromise. "Oh, tut, tut," he said, setting down his glass with refreshed irritation. "What's the smell got to do with it? Did ever a ghost give a man a black eye? That's what I should like to know. If ghosts want me to believe in 'em, let 'em leave off skulking in the dark in the lone places. Let 'em come where there's company and candles." "As if ghosts would want to be believed by anybody so ignorant," said Mr. Macy in deep disgust at the farrier's crass incompetence to apprehend the conditions of ghostly phenomena. End of chapter. That was quite a fun chapter, wasn't it? I quite like that. Quite like those old stories and the men getting drunk in the rainbow and talking to each other like that. Quite fun, quite funny. You can just imagine that kind of thing going on now with some other, maybe football or something like that. Another chapter. No, I think half an hour is enough reading for the moment. I have in this bag, I have a chocolate bar to review. A chocolate bar to review. So I shall read that. Review that, I should say. How's the signal been, by the way? How's the signal, the sound, the picture? Everything top quality, I hope. Everything all right? Good stuff. Is the sound quality all right? Because I'm not using any microphone. I'm just using the laptop's internal microphone. Okay. We're actually fairly getting through this book. We're maybe a third of the way through, I reckon. I reckon that's about a third of the way. Yeah, we're getting through it. Right, so I'll probably do another live YouTube stream next weekend, with next chapter or two of Silas Marner. Do you think, by the way, that the whole thing in the pub, do you think that Silas Marner walked into the pub and observed all of that before saying anything, or had this been going on before he'd entered? I wonder, or is it just this is the kind of thing that happens in the pub? Yeah, anyway, we'll do this again next week. Don't forget to watch some of my other videos, and if you follow me on Twitter, which you all should, of course, you should follow me on Twitter at A9630. I put a link to, I don't know how to do this, or if I can do this on YouTube. I'll maybe put in the comments. I might comment the link to the football commentary that I and the Med did last weekend. He edited it up together into a nice video, so I'll see if I can find some way of showing you that. As I say, it's in my Twitter at A9630, but maybe I'll try putting it in here somewhere as well. Very funny. Yes, it was very funny, I think. And well done to him for spending so much time editing it, I say. Right, so I'll possibly see you next weekend for another bit of Silas Marner. And you never know what I might do during the week as well, and put something on my YouTube, as well as my Periscope and Twitter, of course. So thanks for watching. See you next time, everybody. Cheery bye.